Story 1. I was living just outside Pikeville, Kentucky, about an hour from anything that resembled civilization. Out here, life's simple. We mind our business, and strange things don't get talked about much. But I've never shaken what happened that afternoon at the convenience store down by the main road. It was one of those dull, muggy afternoons where the air feels thick enough to choke you. I'd stopped at Dean's Mart, a little rundown joint with flickering lights and a cracked parking lot where the same 3 cars always sat out front. I just needed gas and maybe a cold soda to cool off. There was a short line at the register, 2 people ahead of me. An old man stood closest to the counter, scraggly white beard stained yellow around his mouth, wearing a beat-up army jacket despite the heat. He looked rough, like someone who hadn't seen a bed in a long time. He held a half-gallon of milk in one hand and a few crumpled bills in the other. The cashier, a bored kid barely out of high school, rang him up without a word. The old man stuffed the change back into his jacket pocket, picked up the milk in a thin plastic bag, and shuffled toward the door. That's when it happened. I swear to God, I've never seen anything like it. The bag ripped. That's what I thought at first. A cheap bag giving way under the weight of the milk. But the way that jug hit the floor? It didn't just drop, it slammed. There was this unnatural force behind it, like someone had yanked it straight down with all their might. The sound was sharp, violent, plastic cracking, milk exploding everywhere in a white, frothy mess. The whole store went dead silent, everyone frozen, staring at the shattered remains of that jug spreading across the dirty tile floor. The old man stumbled back, his eyes wide and wild. He looked straight at us, shaking, and shouted, "Did you see that? Did you see him smash the bag from my hand?" His voice cracked with panic. "Did anybody see that?" Nobody said a word. The kid behind the counter just blinked like he couldn't process what had just happened. The woman in front of me clutched her purse tighter, taking a step back like the old man had lost his mind. But here's the thing. I wasn't so sure he had. The air in that store had shifted, heavy and electric, like right before a thunderstorm. My skin prickled and I felt this cold dread settle in my chest. I wanted to look around, find some rational explanation, a loose shelf, a gust of wind, anything. But there was nothing. The old man's hands were trembling as he pointed at the air beside him. "He was right here," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I felt him grab it. He yanked it right out of my hand. Nobody moved. Nobody said a damn thing. I should have walked out right then, but my feet wouldn't budge. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. The bag hadn't torn the way it should have if it was just the weight of the milk. And the force, that jug had hit the ground like someone had thrown it with everything they had. The cashier finally snapped out of it, muttering something about cleaning up the mess. He grabbed a mop from the corner, trying to act like this was just another day at work. The woman in front of me made a beeline for the door, not even bothering to buy whatever she'd been holding. The old man stood there, breathing heavy, his eyes darting around like he expected something else to happen. "Y'all think I'm crazy," he said bitterly, "but I know what I felt." I didn't answer. What could I say? That I believed him? That I saw something too, even if I couldn't explain it? He shook his head, muttering under his breath as he shuffled out the door, leaving the shattered milk and spreading puddle behind him. I paid for my soda in silence, my heart still racing. As I walked back to my truck, I half expected to see the old man standing out there, maybe looking back at the store with that same wild fear in his eyes. But he was gone. Story 2. I live alone in a small house tucked away at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. The kind of place where you could hear a car driving by from half a mile away. Most nights it's dead silent. I like it that way. My cat, Miso, is my only company. He's not the affectionate type, more of a watch from a distance and judge you kind of cat. But tonight, even Miso seemed off. He'd been pacing around, tail twitching, ears constantly flicking toward the window in my bedroom. I figured it was just one of those nights when stray animals passed through the yard. I'd locked everything up like usual before going to bed, double-checked the front door, latched the windows tight. Living alone, you get into habits like that. You can't afford to forget. It's a thing drilled into you by fear you can't quite name, but always feel when you're on your own. It was just past midnight when I fell asleep. I remember lying there listening to the faint hum of the ceiling fan, my body heavy under the blankets. Miso had settled into his usual spot by my feet. Then I had the worst nightmare of my life. In the dream, I was lying right there in my bed, exactly as I had been. Everything felt real. The weight of the blanket, the cool air coming through the window, Miso's warmth by my feet. But there was this presence. I felt it before I saw anything. My skin prickled like something was standing over me, watching. Suddenly, a figure climbed in through the window. I couldn't move. My heart hammered in my chest, but I was paralyzed, like my body had betrayed me. The figure loomed closer, something glinting in its hand. A knife, long and serrated. I tried to scream, but my throat locked up. The person leaned over me, their breath hot and sour against my face. I saw dark eyes, wide and wild. Then the knife plunged down into my chest. I felt the sharp, burning pain, so real it made my vision blur. Again and again, the blade came down. I thrashed, finally able to move, but it was too late. Blood soaked the sheets. I was dying, I knew it. I woke up gasping, my body slick with sweat. The room was dark except for the faint blue glow from my phone on the nightstand. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath. It was just a dream. That's what I told myself, over and over. Then I saw Miso. He wasn't at the foot of the bed anymore. He was standing on the dresser, eyes wide, fur bristled. His entire body was tense, his gaze locked on the window. The window was open, I swear on everything I know. I had closed that window before going to bed. I always did. The latch was tricky, but I made sure it was secure every night. There was no way I could have forgotten. But there it was, wide open, the curtains billowing slightly in the cool night air. Every hair on my body stood on end. My heart raced and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I didn't want to move, didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I tried to tell myself that maybe I'd left it cracked without realizing it. Maybe the latch had come loose. But that didn't explain the sudden, overwhelming fear gripping me. And it didn't explain Miso. Cats don't get scared like that for no reason. I slid out of bed slowly, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. I didn't want to make a sound, didn't want to draw attention to myself. My legs felt weak as I took a step toward the window, my breath shallow and rapid. The night outside was pitch black, the trees casting long shadows across the yard. Nothing moved, but the stillness felt wrong, heavy. I reached the window and grabbed the latch with shaking hands, pulling it down until I heard the click that meant it was locked. My pulse thudded in my ears. That's when I noticed it. Something faint but undeniable. There were smudges on the windowsill. Not dirt, not leaves blown in by the wind, but actual handprints, like someone had gripped the frame while climbing in or out. My stomach turned. I backed away from the window, my mind racing with every possible explanation, each more terrifying than the last. Was someone still in the house? Had they left already? How had I not heard anything? I looked around the room, eyes darting to every shadow, every corner. The closet door was closed. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, just as I'd left it. Miso let out a low, guttural growl, a sound I'd never heard from him before. His eyes were still locked on the window, even though it was now latched shut. I couldn't stay in that room. Grabbing my phone, I backed out slowly, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained that someone had broken into my house. They arrived quickly, their lights flashing in the otherwise quiet neighborhood. 2 officers searched the entire property while I stood outside with Miso in my arms, his body still tense. They didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, no footprints outside the window. But the smudges on the windowsill were real. One of the officers saw them too, though he didn't say much about it. Just made a note and moved on. "You're sure you locked it?" he asked, giving me a skeptical look. "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm despite the fear still clenching my chest. They left after assuring me they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night. I didn't go back to bed. I couldn't. I sat on the couch with Miso curled up next to me, my eyes fixed on the front door. I don't know what happened that night. Story 3. My wife and I live in a small two-story house on a quiet street just outside town. Nothing special about it. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, creaky stairs that always give away your steps when you sneak down at night for a drink of water. I've lived in places I describe as unsettling before, but this house, it never gave me that vibe. Not until that night. Our bedroom is upstairs at the end of a short hallway. The bed faces directly toward the door, so if you're lying down, you can see straight out into the hallway. My wife likes to sleep with the door open, says it makes the room feel less stuffy. I've always preferred it closed, but I don't argue much over little things like that. It was just past 2 in the morning when it happened. I remember because I had glanced at my phone after stirring awake. Nothing had woken me up, just one of those random moments when your body decides to be inconvenient. My wife was fast asleep next to me, breathing softly. The house was dead quiet, save for the occasional creak as the wood floors settled in the night. I was just starting to drift back to sleep when I heard it. Footsteps, soft, deliberate steps on the hardwood floor, coming from the hallway. At first I thought I was imagining things. Maybe it was just the sound of the house shifting, like always. But no, these steps were different. They had weight to them, heel, then toe, slow and purposeful, as if someone was trying not to wake us. My eyes snapped open, heart thudding against my ribs. I stared straight at the open doorway, but all I could see was darkness beyond the dim outline of the hallway. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but the sound kept coming, getting closer and closer until it stopped right at the threshold of the room. I held my breath, straining my eyes against the dark, expecting to see something, someone, but there was nothing there. For a moment I thought maybe it was just my imagination running wild, and I almost laughed at myself. Then I felt it. A cold, firm grip closed around both of my ankles. I jerked in shock, my breath catching in my throat. The pressure on my ankles was unmistakable, strong, unrelenting, as if someone was holding on to me with both hands. Before I could even react, I was being pulled down the bed. It happened so fast that my mind barely had time to catch up. My body slid downward, the sheets twisting around me as I thrashed. I kicked out instinctively, trying to break free from whatever was holding me, but the grip didn't loosen. My heels scraped against the mattress as I fought against the pull. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cracking with panic. "What the hell? Let go!" My wife shot up beside me, her voice groggy and confused. "What's wrong?" she asked, blinking in the dark. "Why are you halfway down the bed?" I was gasping, heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. The grip was gone. Whatever had been pulling me was just gone. I sat up, panting, my legs trembling beneath the covers. My wife reached over and shook my arm. "Hey," she said, her voice sharper now. "What happened?" I couldn't speak right away. My mind was still reeling, trying to process what I had just experienced. I rubbed my ankles, half expecting to find bruises or marks, but there was nothing. Just the lingering, phantom sensation of icy hands. I don't know, I finally managed to say. I felt someone grabbed me, pulled me down the bed. My wife stared at me like I had lost my mind. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "There's no one here." I knew how it sounded. Crazy, impossible. But it had happened. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining it. I had felt those hands, solid and real, dragging me toward the foot of the bed. I got up, my legs still shaky, and flipped on the bedroom light. The harsh glare flooded the room, revealing nothing out of place. The door was still open, the hallway empty, no sign of anyone or anything that could have done what I'd felt. I checked the hallway, the other rooms upstairs, even went down to the living room to make sure the front door was still locked. It was. Every window was secure. No signs of an intruder. By the time I got back to the bedroom, my wife was sitting up, arms crossed, looking both annoyed and concerned. "You probably had a nightmare," she said. "Maybe sleep paralysis or something. You've read about that, right?" I wanted to believe her. I really did. But sleep paralysis didn't explain the physical sensation, the sheer force of being dragged. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life, and I sure as hell didn't want to again. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Neither did my wife, though she pretended to be unfazed, scrolling through her phone and occasionally glancing over at me like I was some kind of lunatic. I kept the lights on until dawn, my ears tuned to every creak and whisper of the house. Nothing else happened. The house was as still and quiet as it had ever been, as if mocking me for my fear. Story 4. I was living alone back then in a small, quiet apartment on the third floor of a rundown building just outside Pikeville, Kentucky. The walls were thin, the floors creaked with every step, and at night the place was dead silent, except for the occasional distant bark of a dog or the low hum of traffic from the main road a mile out. I wasn't someone who scared easily. Growing up in these parts, you hear plenty of weird stories about things in the woods and shadows, but you learn to brush them off. At least that's what I used to think. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I woke up. I don't remember any dreams or sudden noise that stirred me, just that abrupt, unsettling awareness when your brain flips on like a light switch. My room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside filtering through the blinds. I lay there for a second, blinking and wondering why I felt so on edge. Then I heard it, whispering. At first I thought it was coming from the hallway, or maybe through the walls like one of my neighbors talking on the phone. But it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, maybe hundreds. It was the strangest thing. They overlapped, like when you're scanning through radio stations and pick up fragments of different broadcasts. Soft, hushed voices murmuring all at once, just barely loud enough to hear, but too tangled to make sense of any one word. I froze, heart thudding in my chest, straining to listen. The more I focused, the more unsettling it became. These weren't ordinary voices. They were layered in a way that didn't make sense. Some soft and faint, others sharp and urgent, all blending together like some kind of chaotic chant. I sat up in bed, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Hello?" I called out before I could think better of it. My voice cracked from sleep and nerves. The whispering didn't stop. I felt my stomach twist into knots. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a TV left on somewhere, or some strange acoustic thing carrying sound through the vents. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. This sound wasn't coming from anywhere outside my room. It was inside. And then one voice rose above the others, clear, cutting through the noise like a blade slicing through fabric. "You're going to have to listen to us eventually," it hissed. My blood ran cold. It was louder than the rest, forceful but still in that eerie, whispering tone, like someone leaning close to your ear but refusing to speak normally. I shot out of bed, my legs unsteady beneath me. The whispering swelled, surrounding me from every corner of the room. I backed up toward the door, my hand fumbling for the light switch. My fingers finally found it, and I flicked it on. Nothing. The room was exactly how I'd left it. The clothes on the floor, my gaming setup in the corner, the chair pushed half under the desk. But the whispering was still there, filling the space like smoke. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't just a sound. They were inside me, crawling under my skin and digging into my brain. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the corner of the bed. My mouth went dry. "Stop," I muttered, barely able to hear my own voice over the din. "Just stop." And then as suddenly as it had started, it did. Silence. Not just the absence of whispering, but an oppressive, suffocating quiet that pressed against my ears like cotton. I stood there panting, my heart racing like I'd just run a mile. For a few moments I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just stood there waiting for it to come back, for something else to happen. But nothing did. The room was still, the air thick and heavy, but normal. As normal as it could be after something like that. I don't remember getting back into bed. I must have sat there for a long time, too scared to close my eyes. When morning finally broke through the blinds, I was still sitting up, my back against the headboard, every muscle in my body tense. The first thing I did was email my friend Sarah, who I gamed with almost every night. I didn't know what else to do. I just had to tell someone before I convinced myself it was all in my head. I kept it short. "I know this sounds crazy, but something happened last night. I woke up to whispering, like hundreds of voices, and one of them said, You're going to have to listen to us eventually. I'm freaking out. I don't know what to do. Please tell me I'm not losing my mind. She replied a few hours later, telling me it was probably sleep paralysis or some kind of dream state. Said it happened to people all the time. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew better. I hadn't been dreaming. I hadn't been half asleep. I was awake. And those voices, they were real. Story 5. I live in a small 2-story house on a quiet street just outside town. Nothing fancy, but it's home. The place creaks when the wind hits it right, and the floorboards upstairs will let you know when someone's moving around. Normally, none of that bothers me. It's the kind of noise you get used to after living in a house like this for years. But last night was different. It started around 3 a.m. when I woke up with my throat dry as sandpaper. No big deal. I get up for water sometimes in the middle of the night. I figured I'd just head downstairs, grab a drink, and be back in bed in a few minutes. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, slipped on my house slippers, and shuffled down the stairs. The house was quiet. That heavy kind of silence you only get at night when everyone else is asleep. I remember thinking how cold it was, goosebumps crawling up my arms, despite the fact I'd turned the heat up before bed. When I got to the kitchen, I flicked on the light and let out a yawn. Bright fluorescent light flooded the room, stinging my tired eyes. I filled a glass from the sink and took a long drink, standing there in the silence, savoring the coolness on my tongue. That's when I heard it. Voices. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. They were coming from the front room, low and steady, like two people deep in conversation. At first I thought it was my sister. Sometimes she stays up late, talking with friends on the phone, even when she's supposed to be asleep. I almost rolled my eyes, thinking I'd catch her in the act. But then I realized something was off. The voices were too deep. One of them definitely sounded like a man. I crept toward the kitchen doorway, leaning just enough to peek down the short hallway that led to the front room. The darkness there was thick, the kind that pressed against your eyes and made shadows look like shapes. I couldn't see anything, just the faint outline of furniture and the edge of the front window. The voices kept going. They were speaking Spanish. I don't speak a single word of Spanish, but I know it when I hear it. And these voices weren't whispering either. They were clear, conversational, as if the two people were just sitting there, having a normal talk in the middle of my front room. My breath caught in my throat. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I left the TV on. No, I was sure I hadn't. Besides, the voices were coming from a part of the room where there wasn't any TV. I stood there, my body stiff, every nerve on edge. It wasn't just what I was hearing, it was the way the voices felt. They weren't supposed to be there. My pulse hammered in my ears as I made a decision I wasn't sure was smart. I wanted to test it. I reached for the kitchen light switch, flicking it off. Silence. Not a gradual fade out. Just immediate, deafening silence, like someone had hit a mute button. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. Did they hear me? Were they waiting for me to do something else? I don't know what possessed me, but I flicked the light back on. The voices came back instantly, right where they left off, as if nothing had happened. I swear to God, I could feel my legs turn to jelly. My hands shook on the light switch. I flicked it off again. Silence. On again. The voices returned. It was like the kitchen light was the key to some twisted radio station. I didn't stick around to find out more. I bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, not caring how loud I was being. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it, my chest heaving as I pressed my back against the door. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe I was sleepwalking or dreaming or hallucinating from lack of rest. But I knew deep down none of that made sense. I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours, waiting for someone else in the house to get up so I wouldn't be alone. When morning finally came, I went back downstairs, every muscle tense, half expecting to hear those voices again. But there was nothing, just the normal sounds of our creaky old house. Story 6. I live alone in a small house on the edge of a quiet town. It's nothing fancy, a couple of bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. The hallway stretches from the living room to my bedroom and bathroom. Narrow, dimly lit, even on sunny days, the space has always given me an uneasy feeling, like it didn't belong to the rest of the house. My dog Max, a small mutt with more anxiety than sense, outright refuses to walk down that hall. I usually have to pick him up and carry him to my room. I never gave it much thought. Dogs are weird sometimes. But one night changed everything. It was late, around 2 a.m. I had fallen asleep on the couch with the TV still on. One of those crime documentary marathons droned on in the background, the blue glow flickering across the walls. Max lay curled up at my feet, twitching in his sleep. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding for no reason I could name. The air in the room was heavy, thick like I was breathing in smoke. Max was awake too, staring toward the hallway with his ears pinned back, low growls rumbling from his chest. That's when I noticed it. The house was too quiet. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock on the wall, even the sound of crickets outside, all of it was gone. I sat up, wiping the sleep from my eyes, and tried to shake off the weird feeling crawling up my spine. "Max," I whispered, "what's wrong, buddy?" He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed glued to the hallway, teeth bared now. I followed his gaze but saw nothing, just the dark stretch of that damn hallway leading to my room. Still, something felt wrong. "Come on, Max," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. "It's probably just the wind or something." I stood up, the floor creaking under my weight, and took a step toward the hallway. Max whined and backed up against the couch, refusing to follow. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was a figure standing in the hallway, right in front of my bedroom door. The light from the living room barely reached that far, but I could make out the outline of a person. A man, tall and thin, just standing there. "Hey!" I called out, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound tough. "Who the hell are you?" No response. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized something was very, very wrong. The man wasn't moving, wasn't even breathing as far as I could tell. He just stood there, completely still. I took a shaky step forward, my instincts screaming at me to run the other way. But I had to know what the hell was going on. "You need to get out of my house," I said, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about 10 feet away when I noticed it. His feet weren't touching the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. He was just hanging there, suspended in the air as if an invisible noose held him up. His head lolled to the side, and I swear to God I saw the glint of something dark and wet around his neck. The room tilted, my vision narrowing to a pinpoint as panic clawed its way up my chest. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. Max was barking now, loud and frantic, but I could barely hear him over the blood rushing in my ears. And then the figure moved. It didn't walk or step forward. It just glided closer and closer down the hallway toward me, like it was being pulled by some unseen force. I wanted to run, scream, do anything but stand there like a deer in headlights, but my body wouldn't listen. My legs were jelly, my throat dry and useless. The figure stopped just at the edge of the hallway, half in shadow, half illuminated by the flickering light from the TV. That's when I saw his face, or what was left of it. His skin was pale and stretched tight over his skull, eyes sunken deep into dark sockets. His mouth hung open in a grotesque grimace, as if he had been screaming when he died. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, he said, "Help me." That broke the spell. I don't remember making the decision to move, but suddenly I was sprinting toward the front door, Max hot on my heels. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air under the cold night sky. The house loomed behind me, silent and dark. I stood there for what felt like forever, heart racing, waiting for something, anything, to follow me out. But nothing did. Eventually, I worked up the courage to go back inside, armed with a kitchen knife and a flashlight. I searched every inch of that hallway, my room, the bathroom. There was no sign of anyone. But I knew what I saw. I slept on the couch that night with every light in the house on, Max curled up against me, trembling. And Max, he still won't walk down that hallway. I don't blame him. Story 7. I was working a late afternoon shift at the hospital, near the operating rooms where it always smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt flesh. You get used to it, but it never really goes away. It was quiet, eerily so. The only sounds were my footsteps echoing down the bright white hallway. There were no surgeries scheduled for a few hours, so the place felt abandoned. Nurses and doctors had taken their breaks, and the orderlies had probably stepped out for coffee. I was just finishing up some paperwork and planned to head out soon. As I made my way down the hall, I noticed one of the supply carts parked against the wall, loaded with metal trays, linens, and sterile equipment. Bedpans, too. Those shallow, cold things that nobody likes dealing with, but are a necessary evil in a hospital. One of them sat precariously near the edge of the cart. Before I could think much of it, I heard a sudden metallic clatter. The bedpan hit the tile floor with a loud, jarring crash. The sound echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. I stopped in my tracks, heart skipping a beat. It was strange because there was no draft, no reason for it to fall. Figures, I muttered under my breath, shaking off the unease creeping up my spine. I walked over, picked it up, and carried it to the nearby sink. The water gushed loudly as I rinsed off the pan. The hospital had a rule about hygiene, especially with equipment like this. You clean it thoroughly, no exceptions. So I scrubbed it down, dried it off with a paper towel, and walked back to the cart. I carefully placed the bedpan back onto the tray and adjusted it so it was firmly set. I even gave the cart a little shake to test it, making sure it wouldn't fall again. Satisfied, I turned and started walking away. I only made it a few steps. Clang! The same deafening crash rang out behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I whipped around. There it was, the bedpan, lying on the floor exactly where it had fallen before. I stood frozen, my skin crawling. The hallway was still empty, sterile and quiet. There was no one there. No gust of wind, no cart shifting on its own. Nothing. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Maybe I hadn't balanced it properly after all. Maybe the cart wobbled when I wasn't looking. Maybe I was just imagining how weird this really was. But deep down, I knew better. I forced myself to walk back toward the cart, my legs feeling like lead. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears as I knelt to pick up the bedpan again. My fingers trembled slightly as I gripped the cold metal. This time, I was meticulous. I didn't just set it down, I wedged it between two trays, practically locking it in place. There was no way it could fall again. I stood there for a moment, staring at the cart, daring it to prove me wrong. Nothing happened. I exhaled a shaky breath, trying to laugh it off. See? Just my imagination, I whispered to myself. I turned to leave, taking slow, deliberate steps down the hallway. 1 step, 2 steps. Then it happened. Not a clatter this time, but a scraping sound. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The sound continued, slow, deliberate, like metal dragging against tile. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to keep walking, to get the hell out of that hallway and never look back. But I did. I turned my head just enough to see it, the bedpan, sliding across the floor on its own, leaving a faint scuff mark behind. It moved as though an unseen hand was pushing it toward me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of what I was seeing. And then it stopped. Dead center of the hallway, the bedpan sat motionless, as if waiting for me to pick it up again. I backed away slowly, my mind racing for any logical explanation. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe I was tired. Too many long shifts, too little sleep. But none of those thoughts could shake the gnawing terror in my gut. I didn't touch it again. Instead, I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the staff lounge, my chest heaving and sweat slicking my face. A nurse looked up from her clipboard, raising an eyebrow. "You okay?" she asked. I forced a weak nod, swallowing hard. Yeah, just needed to stretch my legs. I didn't go back to that hallway for the rest of my shift. Story 8. I'm originally from the east side of the city, a place most people either avoid or pretend doesn't exist. I don't blame them. Shootings are regular, and buildings rot where they stand, the bones of a forgotten era. When my friends and I heard about an abandoned school near the industrial strip, we didn't think twice about checking it out. Stupid? Absolutely. But that's just what we did to kill time. The school hadn't seen life since the mid-90s. The roof sagged in places, windows shattered long ago, letting in vines that crept through cracks in the concrete. Even the street leading up to it was crumbling, like the world had given up trying to reach it. The draw for us that night was the storm. Purple lightning danced across the sky, and I swear it looked like something out of a movie. It was weirdly beautiful. We parked a few blocks away, kept quiet as we walked up. There's this rule around here. You hear gunshots, you don't run toward them. You find cover and wait. But as we stood on the cracked steps of the school, watching the lightning, that's exactly what happened. 2 shots cracked through the air, sharp and unmistakable, echoing too close for comfort. We ducked fast, my heart racing. "Inside now!" I hissed. The door groaned as we shoved it open. Rain started pouring, heavy and loud, drumming against the roof like the sky was falling apart. We figured we'd wait it out inside, explore a bit, and then head out once the things settled. The air smelled like mildew and old wood, thick enough to choke on. Our footsteps echoed through the empty halls, scuffing against broken tiles. At first it was kind of cool. The place looked frozen in time. Lockers still lined the walls, some hanging open with rusted hinges. Faded posters clung to bulletin boards, their messages long unreadable. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, puddling in dark spots on the floor. Then it started. I was the first to hear it, a voice faint but persistent, like someone whispering just out of reach. I stopped dead in my tracks, straining to listen. Nothing, just the creak of the building settling and the rain pounding outside. "You good?" Jake asked, nudging me. "Yeah, I thought I heard something," I said, brushing it off. "It's an old building." Noises happen. We kept moving deeper into the school, past rusted classroom doors and graffiti-covered walls. But then Chris, who's usually the skeptical one, stopped too. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "I thought I was tripping," I admitted. "What was it?" "Whispers," he said, his voice low. "Like, right there." He pointed down the dark hall ahead. Nina, the only girl brave enough to come with us, muttered under her breath. "You guys are psyching yourselves out. Let's just keep going." We agreed to push on, but there was tension now, a gnawing unease that crept into my gut. The whispers didn't stop. Sometimes they were faint, like wind slipping through cracks. Other times they seemed closer, following us. Every time I whipped around, there was nothing but shadows. Then we heard the crash. It was absurdly loud, like a car dropping from a rooftop. The entire building seemed to shudder with the force of it. We all froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. "What the actual?" Jake's voice cracked. We waited, breathless, expecting to see something. A chunk of the ceiling on the floor, debris, anything. But when we crept around the corner to look, there was nothing. The hall stretched empty before us, untouched. It didn't make sense. "There's no way," Chris whispered. "We all heard that, right?" "Loud and clear," I said, my voice unsteady. "Maybe the building's just unstable," Nina suggested, though even she sounded unsure. We should have left right then, but curiosity kept us moving forward. That's when we found the chemistry room, tucked at the far end of the corridor. It was one of the few spaces that hadn't been completely trashed. Dust covered the long tables, and beakers still sat neatly on shelves, like some teacher had planned to return one day. In the back corner, there was a small storage room with a heavy wooden door. I don't know why we decided to go in there. Maybe we just wanted to feel like we had some control over the situation, like closing ourselves off from the rest of the building would make it less eerie. We slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind us. The air was thick and stale, heavy with the scent of chemicals that had long since gone bad. I leaned back against the wall, trying to catch my breath. That's when it happened. A bang, sudden and violent, shook the door from the outside. It wasn't subtle. It was deliberate, aggressive, like someone was trying to get in. My pulse spiked, and I grabbed the handle, holding it tight. "What the hell was that?" Chris hissed. "Not funny," Nina snapped, glaring at Jake. "It wasn't me," Jake said, his face pale. I'm right here. I was watching the door the entire time, my eyes glued to that thin crack between the frame and the door. And that's when I saw it. A figure, dark and motionless, standing just on the other side. I couldn't make out any features, just the shape of a person, or something that looked like a person, looming in the shadows. "There's someone out there," I whispered. Jake didn't wait. He pulled out the knife he always carried and nodded toward the broken window on the side of the room. "I'll go around," he said. "Stay here." My heart pounded as he slipped out into the rain. I gripped the door handle tighter, my knuckles white. The figure hadn't moved. It just stood there, unnervingly still. "Jake's got this," Chris muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. Seconds felt like hours. Then Jake's voice cut through the tension. "There's no one here," he shouted from outside. I yanked the door open, stepping into the hall. The figure was gone, just empty space where it had been moments ago. We didn't stick around after that. As we made our way back through the building, Chris and Nina both swore they saw something moving in the windows of the opposite wing, but I didn't look. I didn't want to see. We left the school in silence, the rain drenching us as we sprinted back to the car. None of us talked about what happened that night. Not really. But I know what I saw, and I know I'll never go back. Story 9. We just moved back to eastern Kentucky, near where I grew up, when it happened. My family inherited an old house from my grandpa, the kind with creaky wooden floors and a sagging front porch that groaned every time you stepped on it. I always got weird vibes in that house, but I told myself it was just because it still smelled like Grandpa's pipe smoke, even though he'd been gone for years. That night, my sister Maggie and I were bored out of our minds. The power had flickered on and off all day thanks to a storm rolling through the hills. We sat in the living room with a single lamp casting a weak yellow glow. Rain tapped against the windows, and the wind rattled the loose shingles on the roof. Maggie, being her usual adventurous self, said, "Hey, let's do something spooky." I groaned. "Like what?" "Watch another horror movie?" She grinned and pulled a beat-up Ouija board out of a dusty box we'd found earlier while unpacking. It was one of those old Parker Brothers ones, the kind you'd find at a yard sale for $1. "You can't be serious," I said, shaking my head. "Come on," she said, plopping the board down on the coffee table. "What are you, scared? Of cardboard and plastic?" "No." I lied. I didn't really believe in that stuff, but growing up around here, you hear stories, things in the woods, spirits that don't rest easy, stuff you laugh off until you're sitting alone at night, hearing things you shouldn't. But Maggie was relentless, so I sighed and sat across from her. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, and the room felt unnaturally still, like even the house was holding its breath. We placed our fingers on the planchette. Maggie cleared her throat dramatically. "Is there anyone here with us?" she asked in a sing-song voice. Nothing happened. I rolled my eyes. "Told you, this is stupid." "Shh," she said. "Concentrate." She asked a few more questions, and I was just about ready to call it quits when the planchette twitched under our fingers. "You moved it," I accused. "No, I didn't," she whispered, eyes wide. The plastic pointer slid to yes. I felt my stomach knot up. "Okay, haha, very funny." "I'm not doing it," she insisted. I wanted to let go, but something kept my fingers glued to that stupid board. Maggie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Who are you?" The planchette moved again, slow and deliberate. Grandpa. My throat went dry. Grandpa. I hadn't thought about him in months, not really. He'd been gone for years, died peacefully in his sleep, or at least that's what they said. Maggie's voice wavered. "Is it really you?" The planchette slid to yes. I swallowed hard, my pulse thudding in my ears. This had to be a trick. Maybe Maggie was messing with me, or maybe my mind was playing games. Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The rain stopped. The whole world seemed to hold still, like time itself had hit pause. Then, pop! The living room light bulb exploded, raining glass onto the floor. Sparks flew, and the room plunged into darkness. At the same instant, there was a loud clunk from the breaker box in the basement as the circuit tripped. Maggie screamed and I jumped to my feet, heart racing. The smell of burnt metal filled the room. "What the hell just happened?" I gasped, fumbling for my phone flashlight. "I don't know." Maggie's voice trembled. "The light just exploded." I swept the beam of my phone across the room, illuminating shards of glass glittering on the coffee table and floor. The Ouija board sat untouched, the planchette dead center on goodbye. Neither of us had moved it there. "I told you this was a bad idea," I muttered, my voice shaky. Maggie didn't argue. She just stared at the board, pale as a ghost. "I'm done with this," I said, grabbing the board and shoving it back into the box. "We're never messing with this thing again." We didn't talk much after that. Maggie helped me clean up the broken glass in silence. We both knew what we saw, what we felt, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. Later, after resetting the breaker and locking the board away in the attic, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The storm had passed, but the house still felt heavy, like something lingered in the walls, watching, waiting. I never touched a Ouija board again. And I sure as hell never asked any more questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. Story 10. I'll never forget that summer night. It was one of those nights when the heat still clings to the air, even after the sun goes down, and you can't sleep unless you have a window cracked open. I remember being too lazy to close my curtains all the way, just letting them hang loosely over the frame. It was the kind of night where the sounds from outside drifted in, the rustle of trees, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional chirp of a cricket. I fell asleep like that, the soft noise lulling me to sleep, my window open just a crack. I don't remember when exactly I drifted off, but the dream came quickly and it was so strange that it stayed with me long after I woke up. In the dream, I was standing in the backyard, looking at my window, but from where I stood, it wasn't my own point of view. It was as if I were someone else, standing in the yard with my back to the house. Everything looked like it should. My bedroom, my window, the faint glow of light coming from inside. But it felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be outside looking in. I saw a figure walking slowly towards my window. At first it looked like a person, but there was something off about them. They were tall, unnaturally tall, like their body was stretched out in a way that didn't make sense. Their limbs were long, almost too long for their body, and their head was unnervingly disproportionate. The closer they got to the window, the more the figure seemed to blur at the edges, like it didn't belong in the world I knew. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. And then everything went black. I don't know how long I stayed in that darkness. Time felt like it had stopped. But then the dream started up again. The scene shifted. This time I was no longer outside. I was inside my room, lying in bed. But I wasn't just lying there, as if I were asleep. I was watching myself, watching from a corner of the room, like I was some sort of observer. I couldn't see my face, but I could feel the way my body was positioned, the way my limbs hung loosely over the edge of the bed. The faint sound of my own breathing filled the room. The thing was, the room wasn't exactly the way it was when I went to sleep. No, everything was too perfect, like it had been copied and pasted from my memory, down to the last detail. The slight creases in the curtains, the way the lamp on my desk flickered, the little picture of my dog on the shelf. It was all exactly the same, but too perfect. And then I felt it. It was as if someone had entered the room. A presence. It was so strong that it made my skin crawl. My body, well, my sleeping body in the dream, didn't move, but I felt the tension in the air shift. It felt like something was standing right next to me, watching me sleep. My own breath caught in my throat and I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I remember hearing a soft creaking noise, like the floorboards in the corner of my room, near the window, where I kept my desk. Something was stepping on them, slowly, deliberately. I tried to scream, tried to shout out, but I was trapped in that damn dream, frozen in place, unable to do anything. The thing in the corner of my room, it wasn't just a shadow, it was real. I felt it. That's when I woke up. I remember gasping for air, sweat slicking my skin. The room was dark, but something felt off. I lay still for a moment, trying to shake off the remnants of the dream. the suffocating feeling of someone watching me. And then I saw it. The window was wide open. I hadn't opened it. I was sure of it. I had left it cracked, just a little, but now it was thrown wide, the curtains flapping gently in the night breeze. I could feel the cold air coming in, brushing against my skin, but it wasn't a relief. No, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I knew I hadn't opened the window. I didn't move at first. I stayed frozen in my bed, staring at the open window. The room was silent, but there was this gnawing, crawling feeling that something was wrong. Something had happened, something I couldn't explain. The worst part? I couldn't remember closing my curtains before I went to sleep, but now they were completely wide open. The thin fabric was blowing gently, revealing the full view of the dark yard outside, the trees swaying in the breeze. I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump up, pull the curtains closed, but I was paralyzed. My body wouldn't obey. All I could do was lie there, my breath shallow, my heart racing in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me again. I strained my ears, listening for any sound, any movement, but there was nothing. Just the sound of the wind outside. But then a soft sound, barely audible, came from the direction of my window. It was almost like a whisper, just out of reach. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone sent a chill down my spine. It was a voice, but not one I recognized. I stayed there motionless, trying to tell myself that it was just the wind, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The dream, the open window, the feeling of being watched. It was all too much. I finally managed to move, slowly, like I was in a trance. I reached over and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. My fingers fumbled over the screen as I tried to call someone, anyone, but the signal was dead. I couldn't get a signal. I turned my head back to the window, and for just a second, I thought I saw a shape in the yard, a tall figure standing still, staring at the house. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't wait to see if it came back. I jumped out of bed, pulled the curtains shut with shaking hands, and slammed the window closed. My heart was pounding, my body slick with sweat. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.